Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Family Matters tonight. Tonight we have Gary Steele with us tonight, and we're going to be having a conversation with Gary about exploring the dynamics that go on in communication. From his years of experience of working with people and teaching communication at all sorts of levels, Gary has some really practical insights that will help us both hear and be heard. So Gary's going to give us some of the keys tonight to unlocking effective communication, not locking effective communication, unlocking effective communication in our relationships. We're going to hear stories about how people have put the ideas he shares into practice and have changed lives. In a marriage, between parents and children, work colleagues, brothers or sisters, communication is one of those issues that is so often misunderstood. So welcome, Gary. Good to have you here tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Before we begin, I just thought we'd do a Bible reading, and this one comes from James chapter 1, verses 19 to 21. And it says this: "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. For a man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you." So with that, welcome, Gary. Great to have you here. And I just thought I'm going to ask a question I haven't actually asked you before, but you might have a really good answer to this. Have you ever seen any couple that communicates perfectly?
No. No, but I haven't had a lot of opportunity to see lots of couples. But it's an interesting question, though, because what we see when we watch a couple communicate, or any two people communicate, is a certain, what I call a dance. And we're going to look at this a little later, but every relationship has a dance that describes the way in which they communicate. So that's probably
Yep.
I don't know how you define a perfect communication. I think you have to say, have I seen any effective communication? Yes, I have. I have seen effective communication.
Yeah.
In some situations. Am I an effective communicator? On occasion, on occasion. But usually, interestingly, I'm usually at my best when I'm talking to a stranger. I'm usually at your best when you're talking to familiars, you tend to take shortcuts. Well, because we take shortcuts, you see.
Yeah.
Like in our house, for example, conversations will start when Sandy's in another room, for example. She'll just start talking to me, and I might be 2 rooms away, and I'll be silly enough to try and respond, whilst at the same time continuing to think about what I was thinking about before she started to communicate with me. And this usually ends unhappily.
So automatically you've got a barrier here and a barrier here, and you're trying to fight through 2 barriers. Yep.
That's right. And the biggest one being, I was already in a conversation with somebody else before she interrupted me.
Yeah.
Now, just because that person wasn't present doesn't mean it wasn't a serious conversation in which I was making some fairly valid points and on my way to winning the discussion. And I try and explain this to her. No, we're okay, but we all take shortcuts in communication with the people closest to us, and that's I think that unfortunate.
Yeah.
Oh well, we're looking forward to hearing some pointers and tips tonight, Gary.
Okay. Well, what I plan to do tonight is yes, there are a couple of tips, but more to look at the underlying dynamics of why we are the way we are and how we got to be there, and some of the things that get in the way of our effective communication, and then with the next couple of examples of effective communication that I've actually seen work. as well. So
Yeah,
the subject,
sounds
this is such a huge subject, you know. You can, when I run programs on this, or when I have done programs on this in the past, it would be, you know, a 3-day program. Covering lots of different
we're going to
aspects.
try and do it in 40 minutes.
That's right. With lots of role plays and unpleasant experiences that people have to endure, but that's where the learning comes. You know, when we actually practice some of these things we're going to talk about. So tonight's more about some of the underlying things that affect the way we end up talking to each other and communicating.
Sounds great. So what have you got first?
All right, so the first thing I thought I'd talk about is just a brief overview of how we are made. Now, I don't imagine that I'm going to tell anyone anything that's startlingly new. The whole thing about communication is all the principles of effectiveness are common knowledge, but not common practice, right? So whenever anyone talks about communication, oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I've heard of that before. Yep, no problem. And when a marriage counsellor comes along and says, well, the whole issue in marriage these days is communication, we all go, yeah, I communicate very well. There's no problem. I don't need any counselling. So a lot of what I'm going to say is self-evident, but common knowledge is not common practice, and that's the issue. So what we're looking at this slide here is some of the things that go to make up the way we are. So we have the issue of birth order. So if you're the firstborn in a family, you'll talk and behave differently, and your language will be different to someone who is the middle child, which in turn will be different to somebody who is the third child or the fourth child. And often you can have such a gap between the third and the fourth child that the fourth child becomes the first child all over again. So there's a real dynamic around our birth order that impacts the way we communicate, and it even shows up in the careers we choose. You know, it's not uncommon to find presidents and pastors and other prominent people as firstborn in families. And it's not uncommon to find many middle children as struggling for identity, or peacemakers, negotiators, or clowns. You know, so you can see the way in which where you fit in a family, you carry with you through life in the way you behave in different ways. There's also some innate skills that we're born with. And there's personality traits. I'm getting a lot of feedback there. I don't know if you're getting that, but
that's all right. It's gone.
Okay, personality traits. What I mean by that, many of you would be familiar with the colours exercise, where people look at whether they're orange, green, or blue, and so on. I'm very fond of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the INFP, ESTJ, and that kind of thing. I think they can be very helpful in understanding the underpinnings of our communication in our relationships. And I've done quite a lot of work on the Myers-Briggs stuff. But some of us are also born with.
A couple of weeks ago on what was it? Personality types. We had supporter, influencer. What was it?
Analyzer and driver.
Analyzer and driver. There, between the two of us, we communicated the whole lot.
Okay.
So yeah, that was the model we had the other day, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, they're all helpful. The 16 type profile I use is quite in depth, but you never let anyone tell you who you are. You know, every human being on the planet is uniquely different, and the personality profiles just reflect how we behave over certain preferences in our life. But some of us are born with anger, you know, a little more prone to anger than others. Some are born more patient than others, introvert, extroversion, and so on. It all makes up part of our hard wiring. And then we have on this side what we grow up with in the ecclesia. So there are ecclesial admonitions that seep into us as we go through Sunday school and life generally. And they also have an important part on what we take into communication. And you could spend quite a lot of time just reflecting on the degree of conservativeness and so forth, just our whole approach to our ecclesial life affects us. And then there are parental injunctions, the sort of things our parents tell us, like obey the law, be loyal to the person not present, study the Bible, whatever. But conversely, these can be quite bad as well, like don't trust the police are pigs, you can't trust the government. A lot of those parental injunctions, they feed into our family of origin experiences. And out of that, we get these things, that we call strategies to alleviate anxiety. And so I'll take you to the next slide now and just develop this piece here. But just before I do that, though, just a little anecdote around this slide, just to give you an example of how people coming from different families bring different expectations into a relationship. So I'm thinking of an example of a sister confided to us as a close friend of ours for many years. But she was reflecting one day that when she was first married, and she was married quite young, 19, I think she was. Husband was a little bit, maybe 5 or 6 years older. And anyway, she was having guests home for Sunday lunch, and she had not done this before with visitors. So she'd been cooking meals and so forth for her husband, but this was a special occasion. So she made the Sunday roast and she brought it out and put it on the table in front of her husband with the visitors there. And he looked at it and said, "What do you want me to do with this?" And she was so embarrassed. And after salvaging the situation as best she could, she spent the rest of the afternoon sobbing quietly to herself that her marriage was obviously going to be a disaster. But that was just a very simple, humorous in hindsight example of an expectation. Her father had always carved the roast at lunch, and his father had never done such a thing. And dinner was always presented on a plate, So that's just a little example.
It didn't need communication because they were both sure of exactly where they were, but they were both on completely different pages.
Exactly. And there's a whole issue around our little suitcases we bring into marriage, the invisible suitcases, which is full of all our expectations that we don't actually share. And that's why today pre-marriage sessions are so important, to unpack those suitcases before you physically move in together. Okay, so if we just take these strategies to the next level, I like this idea that every relationship has its dance. I mentioned it before, and we're all a bit different. So Sandy and I are pretty much here until we take our medication, and then we sort of move into this phase. But I learned this in relationship counselling, and the counsellor said to us in a lecture one day, "You can't help anyone at all until you see the dance." And so when you watch two people talk, they'll be sitting there and they've come with a problem, but they're sort of kidding around and they're being very friendly and nice, and you really can't see anything at all. Then all of a sudden there'll be this super thin, super sharp dart that will fire off across the room under the guise of a smile, which gets a response, and then you start to see the dance. You start to see the dynamic of that relationship. But there's a good side and a bad side to this idea. So every relationship involves three parts. So person one with her unique nature, family of origin experiences, and his or her survival strategies to alleviate anxiety. So imagine you were brought up in a house where it was pretty quiet. If mum and dad had any kind of domestic imbalance, as we call it, you didn't really know about it. You noticed that mum and dad went a bit quiet from time to time and didn't seem to be talking, and you got the feeling that things were not quite right. But then things resumed after a while and life continued on as normal. But on the other hand, there's another house where there's a lot of expression and argument and table thumping. And you grew up in that environment, which is where everything's put on the table. Everyone knows what's going on with everybody else, and and that's your family of origin experiences. So two people come together, one from the quiet house where everything is sort of kept under the table, and the other from the house where everything's put on the table. And the first time that there's any kind of just a misunderstanding, one of those parties, particularly the one that's come from the quieter environment, is going to think the world's come to an end when the other person starts getting excited about something and expressing themselves in a fairly forceful way. It's neither is right or wrong necessarily, but both are survival strategies. So the person coming from the quiet house, their way of surviving any kind of misunderstanding is to go quiet, wait till it's over. The person coming from the other place, their way of handling anxiety is to express it. So they alleviate their anxiety by talking excitedly, and the other party handles their anxiety by suppressing it. And so you can't. So these two unique natures come together, and eventually they form a system, right? Their own system that's of their interaction as they kind of work out they work out the dance for them. Now this idea of the dance applies to everything. You know, we have a dance around way we have fun together. We have a dance that describes the no-go subjects. We have a dance that describes what we do when we're upset, and so on. And if you didn't have these, to some extent, things wouldn't go so well at all. But the difficulty comes when one person doesn't have a voice in the relationship at all. You know, because their strategy to alleviate anxiety is not to express their needs. And they learnt that because way back early in the relationship, they tentatively explored the idea of having a chat about the relationship, and the other person, usually the male, said, "I'm okay, so what is there to worry about?" And the other person then said, "Well, I won't go there again," and built a little encapsulation around those feelings. And that became part of their dance, their unique strategy to alleviate anxiety. And then finally, what results is a climate that describes that place, what it feels like to live in that relationship in that place. So you can see, I hope from, and by the way, this idea of survival strategies to alleviate anxiety, I didn't make that up. I think I got that from a book called The Marriage Builder, which some of you might know about. All right, so what we've looked at so far is this idea of our family of origin experiences, you know, the big picture of the first slide, and then this one narrows it down a bit to thinking about, well, what's the dynamic in our relationship? What are the survival strategies that we're using that we mightn't even know about? Even our kids develop these survival strategies too. You know, they have this little world of no-go zones and go zones where they know what they can and can't say with their parents. Okay, so so then if we move on,
it can be quite complicated, can't it? Especially if you've got the two different dynamics in there that they haven't had to, that each partner hasn't had to deal with in the past.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that could get really complicated.
One of the, if I can just share a little personal anecdote here on the expectation thing. I remember very early in our marriage, Sandy said to me one morning, "Would you like a cup of tea?" We're in bed, and she would like a cup of tea, and I thought, well, not particularly. and so nothing happened. And then another day she said again, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And I said, oh yeah, I suppose. So she went and got a cup of tea. And I could just kind of tell, being a super sensitive kind of guy, that something just wasn't quite right here. And of course, then she happened to drop that her father got her a cup of tea every single morning and brought it into her. And so, you know, I finally got, yeah. And so for the next 50 years, I got her a cup of tea or coffee every morning. So, but you see, again, that's that little expectation thing. And there are lots of these that we probably miss that we should explore.
Right.
Yeah. And then talking about if someone doesn't get the cup of tea that they expected, it needs to be talked about.
That's
or
right.
It's going to build resentment.
That's right. and it cuts across all needs, all our needs, and some of us are more dominant in their relationship and run right over the top of the other person's attempt to express their need. They don't even get a chance to express it, and then they encapsulate it and go without. And I think that happens a lot, and I've certainly been guilty of that. You know, being the more dominant person in the house. So now I just want to move on now to another little dynamic that happens, and I'm going to show you a picture about. This is about how we behave. Now, this is a very deep psychological drawing we're looking at here, highly sophisticated, and this is you on a bad day, right? This is you on a bad day, and this is the similar drawing, equal sophistication of a psychological nature, which is you on a good day. You can see that pretty clear, very obvious. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's going to need explaining. It needs explaining.
The drawing's clear.
Okay. Okay. So
looks like
bad
scrambled.
day,
It looks like an egg, actually.
It does look like
Fried
an egg.
egg.
It does. So imagine this: you're driving along the road, and in the traffic, and you're a little bit testy, and somebody cuts in front of you, and you may respond with a polite smile and a welcome gesture, and that indicates you're very happy for them to seal that space that was in front of you that you were so jealously guarding. But you may, on the other hand, react quite differently and with gesticulations that you're not entirely proud of, and mouthing unseemly thoughts because someone's stolen your space. Now, that's what you do on a bad day. On a good day, though, but what you don't realise is that that poor person that just cut you off didn't actually mean to. They were lost, and they suddenly realised they're in the wrong lane, and before they could do anything, they cut across. But you don't give them the benefit of the doubt. You just maintain the rage. But it's also possible, of course, that there's a hidden camera in the back of that car, and they're actually recording your gesticulations and enthusiastic responses to their misdemeanor. And later in the afternoon, they'll be sharing that with their think tank in the university, trying to understand human behaviour in traffic, and you'll be on record there for as long as the study goes. But you see, that's because when we do that, we're brittle on the outside and mushy in the middle. And this is a little model designed by a man named Stephen Covey, who wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and this really resonated with me. You see, when we're brittle on the outside here, we just can't take anybody cutting us off in the traffic. We can't take any kind of misunderstanding. We react in a totally immature and silly way. But on a good day, we're strong on the inside. That is, we're quite comfortable in our values and who we are in the world and where we sit in the world in Christ. And if someone cuts us off in the traffic, well, you know, I'm sure you give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, what happens, of course, in some relationships, in families in particular, you're going to have a family member who understands this dynamic, and you know, this is the kind of person of whom the rest of the family says the equivalent to "don't mention the war," or these days it would be "don't mention vaccination," because they react in a very emotional, antagonistic way that intimidates.
Yep.
That intimidates everybody, you see. And so everybody pussyfoots around them because, you know, you don't want to upset them. And they know that. And they play on it. And of course, what we do when we allow that is we empower the weakness. You see it happen in teenagers. Teenagers can be a bit brittle on the outside and mushy in the middle, and they need to be handled carefully. But at the same time, you can't empower the weakness. This is where we want to be, though. We want to be down here, strong on the inside. So we're resolute in our values and the kind of people that allows us to then cushion the animositousness of other people. I just made that word up. Okay, so how are we going? We all right? You still there?
Yeah.
Hello?
Is it possible to be brittle on the outside and strong on
I suppose you could be.
Is that not a thing?
Yeah, look, I think the idea of the model is it's just a general thing, you know. You wouldn't want to pin it down too much. It's just the idea, you know. Perfect love casts out fear, you know. Perfect love casts out our phobias. It enables us to look beyond our needs to other people's needs. That's strong on the inside, soft on the outside. Okay, so connected with that is this other thing I like to talk about, which is our stimulus and response. Many of you would be familiar with Viktor Frankl. He was the man that he wrote a book called The Man's Search for Meaning, quite an excellent book. He was a concentration camp survivor, and he was a psychiatrist. And when he was in the concentration camps, they were using him for experiments, and they were using him for all sorts of things. They're also using his medical expertise. It was a pretty horrible world. But one of the things he's famous for in his book is his observation that the kindnesses that he saw in the camp of people sharing bread, you know, everyone's starving, everyone's got just a little handful of bread, and there were people in there who would share that bread, and he came up with this stimulus and response idea. In fact, he was also famous for a thing called logotherapy, which is finding meaning in your life, finding meaning in the experiences of your life, which is a pretty difficult thing to do in post-war Germany. But anyway, so the theory goes like this. You have a stimulus, you have a choice, and then you have a response. And he was very strong on this. You always have a choice between the stimulus and the response. And so when people were performing these ignoble experiments on him, he had a choice whether he would hate them or whether he would forgive them. And his theory was, and what he tried to do was to forgive these persecutors for what they were doing to him. And this became an important psychological principle that many practitioners share even today. But he also had another part of this was this idea of how you handle the trying experiences. So he would get together with other friends. These are 22-year-olds, right? They're young men, and they would get together and they would talk about what life was like in Vienna or wherever they came from before the Nazis invaded. And they would talk about the good times they had, and they would relive their past experiences with their wives or girlfriends. And they did this quite deliberately because then they would talk about what they were going to do when they would get out of the concentration camps. Now, of course, their wives were already gassed in another concentration camp. They were never going to see them again. But what he noticed was that the people who were surviving in the concentration camps were the people who had a vision, the people who were anticipating, who were anticipating getting out. And so this is how it works. So you have past happy experiences, present pain, and then future joy. And the way to deal with the present pain was to focus on the past happy experiences with a vision for the future. Now, this all, you might say, well, what's that got to do with the communication? Well, in every conversation we have, there are choices about how we respond. We make choices about how we respond. And when things are a little unbalanced domestically, we often don't make the right choices. We don't think about the future. We don't think about what the best outcome is for the other person in the conversation, and so on. And so we're a bit dysfunctional. All right. So that then leads us to another key foundation to our model, and that is this thing called the emotional bank account. I'll just keep moving. Yeah, I used to be a facilitator of this program called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it was fabulous. You know, there are many of the models in there, and Stephen Covey, the man who created this, was he's died now, but he was a very devout Mormon. And as you go through his program, what you're actually reading is just secularized versions of the scripture, and it was a joy. It was a joy to be able to track back to the underlying scriptural principles behind his work. But this emotional bank account was probably the most powerful thing for me personally, because everyone is in relationship with everybody else in the world, right? Every person is in relationship with everyone else in the world, but just to a greater or lesser degree. And in those relationships are defined. Those relationships are measured by a trust equation, right? The degree of trust that exists in the relationship. And so we have this bank account. So in every relationship, to Robert and Sharon, you and I have a relationship in as much that we're brothers and sisters in Christ, and we have communicated this seconded time now and in between times, and we put deposits in each other's emotional bank account. Now, if I was to bail out of this 5 minutes,
so there's quite a lot in yours actually, there, Gary.
We're in your desk.
No, not quite. I was just about to explain how I could have made a major withdrawal on your bank account by not turning up tonight, for example. But let's just think about deposits, right? So here are the deposits that we make in each other's bank account. So we listen, we show understanding. That's a huge deposit. You know, we could spend a whole night just talking about listening. Attending to little things, keeping commitments, clarifying expectations, showing integrity, apologizing for withdrawals, praise. These are all deposits. On the other hand, withdrawals are things like not listening, telling lies, not keeping commitments, confusing instructions, lack of integrity and pride, and there would be other things as well. All right, so the question we ask is... So had you
not turned up tonight?
That would have been a huge withdrawal.
Not turned up tonight, it would have been a big withdrawal on our part, because we're going, oh no, where is he? What's happening? And he said he'd be here. Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, just stay with that for a second, you see, because that would have been also, so it's a withdrawal from the emotional bank account, but it's also undermines the trust in the relationship, because you'd be thinking, well, I'm not so sure we'll ask Gary to come again because he let us down last time. And Sharon, being the kinder of the two, might have said, I will give him another chance because after all, you know, he had a really good reason for not turning up. But you'd be still thinking, well, you know, a bit like John Mark letting down the Apostle Paul in his second missionary journey. I'm not sure I'd want to take him on the next trip, you know, or the first missionary journey, whichever one it was. That was a withdrawal from the Apostle Paul's emotional bank account so that he wasn't confident. So this becomes a measure of trust. So you drill this down to the family. And this is what was so powerful for me when I learned about this, because whenever any of us say yes to a request, right, someone wants you to do a talk at the meeting, or somebody wants you to do something, help out someone, you know, with a renovation or anything at all, and you say yes, there's always someone for whom that yes is a no. So every time you say, yes, I'll do this, you're saying no to someone else. And of course, the person you're saying no to are the people at home, right? The people closest to you. So what we tend to do over a lifetime is we tend to make lots of withdrawals from the people closest to us on the grounds that they will understand, or they understand that this work is important. But of course they don't. They don't. And what they learn is they're not important, and everyone else is more important, and they just get used to it, and they cannot trust you to keep your word when you say, well, on Saturday we'll do this, or next week we'll do that, because it gets cancelled every time. So in marriages, this is particularly devastating, because I've seen relationships where one party, usually the husband in my experience, has been making little withdrawals on the family bank account for decades. And then one day he wakes up and he's sleeping in bed on his own. And this is a true case. Because in the particular case I'm thinking of, one of his daughters said to his mother one day, "No man is ever going to treat me the way Dad treats you." And on this particular occasion, this sister suddenly woke up and saw the light. The brother, when I was talking to him, he couldn't understand how apologising and just buying some flowers didn't fix 30 years of neglect. And Stephen Covey has a great, so Stephen Covey has a great saying for this. He says, you cannot talk yourself out of what you behaved yourself into. Right? You cannot talk yourself out of what you behaved yourself into. If you've made all these withdrawals over 20 or 30 years, you don't have enough time in your life to fix that. So it's really. So I found this really very sobering.
As James says, you can't love in word only. You got to love in word and action. I think we almost got that right.
That's right. That's exactly right. So the challenge is to think about our relationships, and particularly with our kids and our spouses and the people closest to us. People remote from us, they can handle withdrawals because they don't have to work with us all the time, and you can put deposits in their bank account really easily, just by doing some small thing, because the expectation is low. But with our family, they're the ones who we make the withdrawals from, and we do it almost unconsciously. So it's a neat little exercise to identify 3 important relationships and mark where you think you fall in terms of the emotional bank account balance with that individual. Like, for example, going back to this, when was the last time you gave them any praise? When was the last time you kept a commitment, clarified expectations, showed integrity, apologized for letting them down, just given praise, And when you start to do this exercise, you find that, you'll start off thinking you're up here somewhere, but when you try and illustrate it with examples, you'll find yourself sliding back down here, back down into the withdrawal department. And it's quite a sobering experience to just do that. All right. So the next thing before we get on to a practical example of actual talking to somebody, I just want to share this with you. This might seem a little bit strange to some of our listeners here, and on the other hand, some of you might know more about it than I do. But this was another model that struck me many years ago that I found useful. It's called transactional analysis, and it's based on this idea that within us are 3 ego states: parent ego state, adult ego state, and a child ego state. And we communicate out of these ego states. And there's a language that goes with each one. So in this one, for example, this is where we get the ought, must, always, this is ridiculous, tried that before, it didn't work, it's bad, it's a dumb idea, the ABs don't know what they're doing, and so forth. It's critical, but it's also nurturing.
So that's the sort of language a parent would use on a very small child.
That's right. That's exactly right. But we find ourselves using it, though, parent to parent, like when we say things like, "Oh, this is ridiculous, this won't work," or what the AB should do is this. We use absolute terms, and we get together and we go into our parent mode, and we go to town on whatever's going on that we don't like. But it's also where we do our nurturing. So that's where the terms of endearment and loving language and so forth comes when dealing with, again, the child. All right. So now these are not necessarily bad. For example, let's just say you're in a situation where the pleasure hall catches fire or something, and nobody really knows what to do, and you do know what to do. Then you don't say, "Well, let's form a committee in the middle of the room here and discuss our options." You say, "Listen to me, I know how to get out of here, follow me, and we'll all get out in one piece, do exactly as you're told, there'll be no problem." And everyone goes, "Yes, sir, thank you," and falls in line, follows you out the door. So it's not like there isn't a place for this, but what happens, it gets misplaced. And so when people talk, when you watch people talking, you will hear in the dynamic, you will hear the parent voice, the adult voice, and the child voice. So down in the child down here, you have the conforming child. That is the child that says, I just didn't put these up before. So that's the nurturing language. And then down the bottom here, we have the child language, which you'll get into trouble if you do this, or we better do what we're told. And in some senses, that's not a bad position to take, particularly if your government's telling you to get vaccinated at the moment. Not that I want to go back to that subject. But you also have down in the child, the rebellious child and the fun-filled child, right? So this is where we have fun, and there's good elements of that and bad. But the adult is where we do our reasoning and look at the practicalities, and we talk in a fairly even-minded, consultative kind of way. All right, so my daughter comes to me one day and she says, Dad, me and my friends at the meeting are going to a concert. And now my immediate reaction to that is to say, over my dead body, But on this particular occasion, I've been dealing with this stuff and I didn't do it. And instead I said, oh, that sounds interesting, coming from the adult to an adult, because she's 16, and whether you like it or not, no matter how they behave, once your kids get to 16, you've got to talk to them like adults. Going parent-child just doesn't work. It just creates aggravation. So I said, well, that's interesting. That sounds, I'm not quite sure I'd like to do that, but tell me about it. And of course she immediately started to get suspicious because I didn't do this. And she said, what do you want to know? And I said, well, is this one of these outdoor concerts where thousands of kids all get jammed in together? And of course she's only about 5'2" and very slight. And they actually spray the kids with water to cool them down because they die. Some of them die, I don't know about, no, they do. So all I'm saying to you is, if you go to this thing, you really need to get close to those water cannons, and preferably closer to the ambulance bay as well. But tell me more. Tell me who's going to go with this. So tell me more about who's going to go. So she mentions the names of the kids she's going with, and I say, well, they're good kids. That sounds all right. But I am a bit concerned about the security arrangements. Like, for example, this is at Moore Park. You're going to have to catch a train, a bus, then you've got to come home, and there'll be lots of crowds, hundreds of thousands of kids. And when you get to Central Station, the boys and girls that live out west will go out west, and you'll be on your own at 1 o'clock in the morning in a carriage, in a train, coming back to Cogra. And then when you get back to Cogra, you've got to walk from Cogra Station to home. Now, I'm just wondering about what security arrangements you've got in mind to ensure you get home safely. Can you walk me through that? She said, oh, I don't know about that. And then off she went. And then a little while later, I said, so what's the deal? What's the deal with this concert? We're not going. Well, why aren't you going? Some of the other parents wouldn't let the kids go. Okay, well, that's all right. I think that's a good decision, don't you? She said, well, I didn't actually want to go anyway, really. I was only wanting to go because the others, and of course the others only wanted to go because they thought the others wanted to go. But my point is, by not taking the parent to child, which is entirely appropriate to any kid under 12, entirely appropriate, in a 16-year-old doesn't work. It's better to go adult to adult, engaged in the conversation. Now, of course, she wasn't going to go. I would have tied her up, locked her in a room. If she was not going to go, there was no two ways about that. But it didn't come to that. It didn't come to that because we allowed some scope for some reasoning to take place and engage the adult in her. Right now, she was ready to go into rebellious child and kick up a fuss. I don't think she would have gone anyway, but she was ready to go here. But because I engaged her at this level, she responded at this level. Now, this dynamic works in our relationships all the time. And I encourage everyone who might be finding themselves in the occasional domestic imbalance, listen to who is talking. Is this your adult talking both ways? Are you in the right place for this conversation? Are you using the right ego state to have a sensible conversation, or you've got a mismatch going? Because the other way of this is one person's trying to talk in the adult, and the other person is talking from the child. In fact, I was talking about this at a family week the other week, and a brother came later, sent me a text saying, I do this all the time. My wife talks to me in parent and bosses me around, and I respond in a childlike, stupid way, just mucking around, not taking it seriously, which winds her up even more. And
Yeah.
he really got that. Okay, so now in each of us, there are these three ego states, but one tends to dominate more than the others. So you'll see people who, when they speak, they're speaking mostly from the adult all the time. Other people, you hear them speak, sound like they're speaking from their parent all the time, and some are always speaking from their child, or seem to be. And so in the dynamic of a relationship, this is a really important thing to kind of be aware of. Now, I'm very conscious of the time, and I wanted to just do one more little illustration of communication, if I can.
Okay.
So this is about how to have a conversation. Now, I'll just put this model up. Don't try and comprehend it all at once. This is a consulting model that I've been teaching for years, and it's drawn from lots of well-researched stuff. Whoops. And it takes quite a long time to work through this, but it's really all about if you're having a discussion. Like, for example, when I was talking to my daughter, I started off by diverging. I gather information, seeking to understand, and then when I've fully understood and demonstrated my shared understanding, then I can have my turn and seek to be understood. Quite often when we talk to people, we work in the reverse of this. We come out talking about what we want to say, and we don't find out they're not agreeing with any of it until it's too late. So
and that's where speaking as a parent, or in that parent ego state, you're always going to be speaking to be understood. First of all, you're not listening.
Exactly right, Robert. Exactly right. So seeking first to understand, then to be understood is the key to effective communication.
Right.
Tell me what you're experiencing. Tell me what you're thinking. Help me understand. Take your time. I've got all the time in the world to understand your point of view. Stephen Covey has this wonderful expression where he says, the most affirming thing that you can do for another human being is to demonstrate that they have been heard, right? To demonstrate that they have been heard. Many sisters will relate to this. I don't want you to fix the problem. I just want you to understand the problem. Stop trying to fix it. I can fix it myself. I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm just asking you to understand. It's classic male-female dynamic, isn't it?
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
And that's another session in itself, isn't it? So one of the keys, I just want to focus on this little bit here, right? This little bit here, purpose, value, permission, how we start conversations. So I'll go back to my daughter again. And she's an artist. Mind you, she's 40 years of age now, I just want to mention, but when she was living at home, she's an artist, and her bedroom was an absolute nightmare. And of course, I could have gone into my parent mode and said, I will call her Julianne because that's her name. Julianne, tidy up your room, I could have said. And we could have then had an argument about who owned the room and all that kind of thing, a typical parent thing. But instead, I said, and I give you these illustrations because they're the only illustrations I've got where it actually worked. I said to her, honey, we need to have a chat about your room. I think a conversation would definitely be useful to both of us. Purpose of the conversation, talk about your room. value, it will be useful to our relationship. Would it be okay to have a chat about your room? And she's looking at me like, why isn't he yelling at
I'd be
me?
speechless.
Why isn't he? What is going on? This is another one of your communication tricks, Dad. Is that what we're doing here? Well, no. Well, yes, it is. But isn't it nice? I'm asking permission to have a conversation about your room. Is that okay? Not today. All right. So good. I can see you're busy. When would be a convenient time? Tomorrow. Now, what do you suppose happened between then and tomorrow? Well, a goat track appeared between the door and the bed, which was in her mind a big improvement, and an attempt was made. Purpose, value, permission. Get permission to have the conversation. Give the person a reason. What's in it for them? So this is what I want to talk to you about. So I was running this program, and I'll just jump ahead a bit here, for these people in South Africa. Now, this is employees of Roche Pharmaceuticals, and there's an equal number on the other outside of the picture, on the other side of the room. There's about 100 odd people there, and we're going through that model that you just saw over a period of 3 days, and we're teaching them consultative skills to use on their doctors, and that's another subject in itself, because these people are basically salespeople. And of course, when we hear someone say, "Oh, it's teaching people how to sell," that's terrible. Selling is so unethical. But I'd put it to you that an effective human being and an effective salesperson are absolutely identical. It's just that most salespeople are not effective, and most of us are not effective either in communication. But when you apply these models, they really work. So I was teaching this model about purpose, value, permission. And one of the managers in this group went home that night and tried it on her husband. And she came in the next day and said, "Oh, Gary, I tried it. I went home and I had this conversation with my husband, and he agreed to do something that I've been on his case for 9 years to do." And I said, "Well, that's fantastic. Thanks for the feedback. Really appreciate it." Anyway, the next that evening, I'm driving back to the hotel with the marketing director of the company. He says, "Do you know what the conversation with her husband was about?" And I said, "No, she didn't share it." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you. She'd been on his case for 9 years to go to a Bible class, and when she went home and applied this process for the first time, he actually agreed to go to a Bible class." Now, most of the people in this picture here are born again.
Wow.
It's not uncommon in South Africa. South Africa has a political environment that encourages religion, I think, given that most of these people have got a horrendous story about some kind of violence that's affected them or someone nearby. But the point is, you ask yourself, why did he suddenly change his mind? Well, and the answer is she went home and she applied the principles of adult to adult conversation. Instead of saying, "I wish you'd go to the Bible class, I wish you'd go to a Bible class," she went home and said, "Bob," whatever his name is, "I really would like to talk to you about something that's really important to me that I have talked to you about before. However, I feel that it would really enhance our relationship if I could just have this conversation to fully understand your position. Is it okay if we talk about Bible class?" And he said yes. Now, you see, as soon as he says yes, he's halfway committed. As soon as the other person that you're talking to gives you permission to have the conversation, the power has shifted in the dynamic from you to them. They are now in control of the conversation. You're not just talking at them, you're actually giving them the power. And so they had a conversation and he agreed. So that's a great illustration of how powerful simple techniques, if you like. Techniques sounds kind of contrived, but what we don't get is that all our models of behaviour, all our interactions are contrived anyway. The way we respond automatically is just as contrived as practicing a learned model. It's all a contrivance to get our way.
Just back breaking up again was she was just seeking to understand his perspective on why he had not been wanting to go to Bible class in the past. Was that where it came from?
Okay, her objective was to get him to go to the Bible class, right? That was her objective.
Yes.
But what she never really allowed him to do was to explore out loud why he didn't want to go. See,
Right.
when we nag people, we assume that all the good reasons for why they should comply are self-evident, but they're not. And until they express their point of view and hear themselves say it, and there's another saying that goes, "While I'm speaking, I'm only learning what I already know. When the other person's speaking, they're learning what they believe, and you're learning what they believe." So if she goes home and says, "I would like to have a talk about Bible class. I would like to understand your position on it, and I think it'll enhance our relationship." Now, deep down, he wants to please his wife. You know,
Yep.
he will do it for her. She just doesn't give him the opportunity to be magnanimous about it because he's always being nagged. And nagging really is not the most effective way of changing somebody else's behaviour. And so by giving the power to him, so the first thing she did was get permission, right? So first of all, she told him what she wanted to talk about. Then she told him the benefit. Then she said, "But if you don't want to talk about it, that's absolutely fine. But I'm asking you, would you like to talk about it? Would you talk about it?" And he said yes. Now, as soon as he said yes, he was open then to sharing his, because then the next thing, I don't know if she followed the model all the way, but in the model you would then say, "So tell me about your feelings with regard to the Bible class. What is it about Bible class you don't like?" And he would have been scrambling. He would have been scrambling because he's just been pushing back for 9 years. And as he speaks, he learns what he believes. And as he's listening to himself talking, he's thinking, "And that's not very convincing. And she would like me to go, and I would like to please her, so I will go."
Yeah.
No, I don't know if he did. I flew home 2 days later, so I don't know. But these simple little processes that are well grounded in Scripture, really, if you think about it. I mean, why should you force a conversation on someone without asking them if they'd like to have it? You know, why should someone
a conversation that is, especially a conversation that is a bit challenging to one of the parties.
That's right. That's right. And
I like the point you make. I like the point you make, Gary, that this model allows someone then to be magnanimous, whereas the other way they keep putting the brakes on because it's pushing them into a corner. So nobody likes being pushed into a corner, so they keep maintaining their stand on it because they don't like being pushed.
That's right. That's right. And because we're afraid of what people might be thinking, we keep talking at them in the hope that they'll just accept what we're saying. And look, this is the key. This is the key to effective communication. That model that I showed you is the key to effective communication. But it does require. Whoops, I'm sorry, I've gone the wrong way. It does require patience and planning, thinking through. I've got a little saying up here, what is the one thing this individual will do differently as a result of this conversation? Think about that if you've got teenage children. What is it you want them to do? What is one thing? Now, that one thing might be simply to open a dialogue on talking about their life. But we shortcut that and say, you can't go to the conference, you can't go to the concert, you can't do this, you must go to the meeting. We take shortcuts, and instead of opening up a dialogue where we explore things and get understanding and develop a relationship, we shortcut the whole thing and end up making huge withdrawals from the emotional bank account of the other person. So we're out of time, Robert. This might be a good time to stop this piece.
Okay,
There are lots of
That's been really good. Thanks, Gary.
Fascinating stuff.
Absolutely fascinating. And glad we went that little bit over time. That was great. You know, and we've learned such a lot tonight. You know, right from backgrounds through to that whole communication model and all that sort of stuff. It's been really, really good. So thank you so much for that.